Welcome to History Hack. If you didn't know by now, we are the revolution. That means we're sharp, witty, lots of fun, but it also means that we're essentially the peasants in Les Mis huddled round a table in the corner of the bar with no money. If you enjoy the show, please do support us. We have a Patreon account by which you can donate a small monthly sum in appreciation of what you're hearing. Alternatively, we have Ko-fi, in which you can just do a one-off donation as a thank you if you particularly enjoy a certain episode. Either way, we massively appreciate all of your support. Hope you enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to today's History Hack. We're doing a fun one today, so I went and got Sam, because if we're going to talk about a ballsy woman, then I feel it should be me and Sam. Do you agree?
Hello. Yes, the minute I heard the term warrior queen, I was right in there. Today with us, we've got Joanna Arman. Joanna, how are you?
Doing good. Not too wet, thankfully.
Excellent. Joanna is a historian who specialises in the Anglo-Saxons and women in feudalism. She's written a biography of Ethelfled, the warrior king. Did I pronounce the name correctly, Joanna?
You did.
Fantastic. That was always a risk. She's here to talk to us today about her new book, Margaret of Anjou, She-Wolf of France and Twice Queen of England. So, Joanna, what was Margaret's early life as a French noblewoman during the end of the 100 Years' War?
Right, so she married Henry VI when she was 15 years of age. So, yeah, he was 23. Honestly, the first 15 years of her life, quite tumultuous. Her father spent a long time as a prisoner of war, René of Anjou, but believe it or not, he wasn't fighting the English. He was trying to regain his lands in Italy.
Makes a change.
Yeah, so he wasn't well. He fought the English a bit, then he decided to regain his lands in Italy. It got very complicated. So she was basically raised by her grandmother and her mother. Her grandmother, of course, was Yolanda of Aragon, who you've probably heard of. She was quite formidable. Bit of a supporter of Joan of Arc back in the day. Also the mother-in-law of the King of France. So she was raised in her court, very literate. They liked the romances of Melisende, actually. That's another good old Melisende legend, the fairy woman who married the Plantagenet ancestor. And yes, she was obviously primed to rule, brought up to believe she would marry some great nobleman, but maybe not the King of England.
Which sounds impressive,
Yes.
but in the nicest possible way, Henry VI is not impressive. But at least that paves the way for her to be awesome.
Oh, Henry VI, yeah.
Let's see. What is the court like that she arrives at?
The English court in, 1445, which is the year she gets married. She's born in 1430. 1445, yeah. Henry's just sort of left his minority. He's 23 years old by this time, so the kings reach their majority at 21. Things haven't started going wrong yet, but they're about to go kind of pear-shaped. The war in France there have been good points. Well, good points for the English anyway, which means victory and getting more land or protecting their lands. There have been good points, but things are starting to go France's way a lot more by the 1440s. There's recriminations, and the thing that doesn't help is there's rumours that King Henry married Margaret without a dowry. And instead of a dowry, they give up the county of Maine.
I was going to say, got her on the cheap, but that's not so bad.
Yes, got her on the cheap, but then had to give up land to get her. The county of Maine and Anjou in France, and they're like, why are you paying the French to marry her and giving her back the land? Yes, orcs.
Do we know if she was happy, or do we know what her life was
Well,
like?
actually, she didn't leave France for quite a long time. There was a marriage by proxy, which means that someone stood in for the groom when she was still in France. The actual proper marriage happened in England, in Titchfield Abbey, which is in Hampshire, I believe. But it was several weeks before she actually went to England. Don't know what the illness is, but it's quite possibly anxiety, or brought on by anxiety, because I remember she's only 15 years old. She's going to go to a foreign country, which she probably doesn't have much great love for the English. I mean, her grandmother's Yolanda of Aragon, as I say, she's a niece of the King of France. She's been raised amidst the 100 Years' War, so she's probably very scared.
You're in a room with two romance skeptics here. So what was her marriage like in those early years before the Wars of the Roses kick off?
Well, her main problem is it took her so long to have a child. And that was something that caused a lot of people to look down on her. So it's 8 years between her marriage and of her birth of her only child.
Which so is why, really, is it because by this point he's descended into what we think is a catatonic schizophrenic trance.
Yes. And she's about 6 months pregnant at that point.
Okay. But he just gets a baby put in his arms and is like, ta-da! And he just obviously doesn't react because he's catatonic. Yes. But people are like, really, Margaret?
Well, again, there's something that we go into in the book is one of the reasons she might have had trouble conceiving is she was fasting a lot of the time, which ironically she was doing to help her conceive. But obviously the medieval understanding of medicine, she was fasting several days a week, possibly, which obviously wasn't helping her. And then there was stress, which again, we have a better understanding now. I think 1450 didn't help when the Earl of Suffolk, who had been a great friend of hers, was had his head lopped off by a bunch of really annoyed people.
Then kind of we barreled towards the Wars of the Roses now, haven't we?
Yay.
Clearly, she's Team Lancastrians.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yeah.
She gets this nickname of She-Wolf.
So I know I've had a bit of a thing about the title She-Wolf. That was actually something that my publisher opted for, though I'm all right with it. She-Wolf is actually what Isabella of France was called. It was Shakespeare who first dubbed her the She-Wolf of France in Henry VI Part 2. Richard, Duke of York, calls her the She-Wolf of France. There's basically the idea of the transgressing woman, the woman who is transgressing social boundaries and acting in an unfeminine way.
So is this a mark of respect or a bit derogatory?
Definitely not a mark of respect. You don't call someone a she-wolf as a mark of respect. Sorry.
I would.
Yeah, probably would now. No, it's basically the idea of the vicious she-wolf that attacks its own kind, almost. It is she-wolf of France, yet worse than wolves of France. And then he goes into this, Richard Duke of York in the Shakespeare play goes into this whole thing about how vicious she is and how evil she is, and it's full on.
Messing with history, that never happens.
I say people say, "Oh, poor old Richard III is vilified in Shakespeare." Margaret of Anjou gets it almost as bad, to be fair.
So, in reality, what is she doing to prompt this opinion? Is she popular?
What really started it was when she tried to claim the regency. After her son's born, Henry's in the catatonic state. So this early 1454. Her son's born in October 1453, so he's only a couple of months old. She tries to claim the regency, which for her is quite makes sense. Lots of French women and lots of European women had been regents for underage children. And her grandmother sort of had looked after her father's lands. Her mother had acted as a regent even for a while. So she's like, yeah, why can't I do it? But this is England. We don't do female regents. So they're like, everyone's panicking at this point. It's like, oh my goodness, she wants to rule everything. She wants to take all the power for herself. Oh my goodness, we can't let this happen. That's when the rumours start flying. There's a Paston letter. I think it's one of the Paston letters where it says she seeks the rule of the whole realm, to make the laws and everything for herself, which, that's a bit of an exaggeration. She doesn't really want to make all the laws.
So all of this, it puts Margaret and her son in the centre of political intrigue, doesn't it? By those both trying to save Lancastrian rule and those trying to replace them. Could you talk a bit about that?
Oh, yes. This is definitely something we've looked at. And 1454 is the point where she really starts butting heads with Richard Duke of York for the first time, because, of course, they make him regent, not her. And which doesn't, and it doesn't help that he spends almost all of his time at regent putting his favourites in power and trying to get the Duke of Somerset, who is her good friend, executed. So she's like, what is this guy up to?
Sounds like Boris Johnson.
Yes, at this point she's quite worried. So not only has she been denied regent, she's having a go at her friends, and I think it's a bit legally complicated, but there's a law that's being changed about it. It's called resumption. It's about certain grants and privileges the royal family is being given, certain money. She's having a lot of them taken away from her. So she thinks that the Duke is keeping her poor. She believes that he's possibly going to perhaps make a bid for the throne, possibly out to get her. certainly out to get the people that she likes. So I think it's this point forward, really, she started to consider him a threat.
Like a good 15th century woman, she knows her place and backs right down, doesn't she?
Well, she would have done before her son was born. Let's just say she probably would have done before her son was born, but afterwards, no, she does not back down.
She's absolutely fit, isn't she?
Yeah, after this point, she's like, no, I'm not backing down again. Not happy. So, as soon as the king recovers, she encourages him to reverse everything that Richard Duke of York has done. She encourages him to put Somerset back in his place, and she's like, this guy's dangerous. So this is where the first Battle of St Albans happens. It's also from this point that we start seeing Margaret getting a lot more politically active. A few years later, fast forward to about 1458, 1459, she's distributing, they're called livery badges. They're sort of her insignia to people in the Midlands and on her own lands. There's even some talk that she's raising troops, possibly to fight against the Duke of York if he rebels again.
So 1460 comes along and it's disastrous because basically Henry VI gets lifted off the battlefield and the Yorkists run away with him. So things are not going well for the Lancastrians. So Margaret is on the run now. Where does she go? What does she do?
This is the thing. 1459 to 60, she actually goes for a while to the Midlands and Wales to spend time with her supporters because there's got a strong Lancastrian power base there. There's people like Jasper Tudor around in Wales, of course. She actually ends up in Scotland. She's in Scotland at the time of the Battle of Wakefield. She was not torturing the Duke of York personally at the Battle of Wakefield. Sorry to say, Philippa Gregory lovers. Yes. She is in Scotland, making friends with the recently widowed, actually, Queen of Scotland and trying to raise troops for an invasion of England. So she's not spending all her time moping and feeling sorry for herself. She's quite active at this time. And she actually marches south with her army. She wants to get her husband back. She actually does manage to get Henry back from Yorkist control. This is, I believe, the second Battle of St Albans. She actually does manage to wrest him back from Yorkist control. The Lancastrians win a very rare victory in early 1461, but she can't get back into London, which is the problem. By this point, there's a load of fear-mongering about the evil queen is coming with all her barbaric Scots and she's going to completely ravish London and burn everything and it's going to be a complete disaster. So she's basically trying to finagle her way into London, trying to negotiate her way into London when Edward IV comes along and gets himself crowned king.
Evil queen ravishing London already sounds like I might have a new historical hero.
Yes, I wasn't actually going to do it, you understand. It's just that she was French and had Scots in her army, so they're like,
oh, my two favourite nationalities. You've already touched upon this, but let's get a myth crushed. We love a good myth crushing here. Did she stab the Duke of York at the Battle of Wakefield?
No, she was in Scotland.
Boo, nobody wants your logic, Joanna. We like that.
Yeah, that's what I said. No, she was in Scotland. She couldn't have done it. She wasn't even there.
Can we at least say she would have if she'd had the opportunity?
Probably. Probably. To be fair, yeah, she probably would have done, but she didn't. Not to say that she wasn't happy about it.
She, what I love about her is she absolutely just refuses to lie down, ever. At this point, Edward IV has become king. So at this point, Margaret's in exile again.
Yes.
Still a huge thing to lie down, though.
Houghton, which is a really big one where Edward IV establishes his rule and possibly the single bloodiest battle in English history ever fought. Possibly, I think there's something like 20,000 casualties, is some people estimate. Yeah, after this point, she is in exile again in England. Again, going from place to place to place. Mostly the north, mostly Wales. But again, she's not staying quiet. There's evidence from letters at this point. She's writing to some of her friends in France. She's trying to get support in France. Again, to launch another invasion. She's handling almost everything.
Does Henry go back into another trance?
There may be one. It's hard to say after 1461 what his mental state is, really.
I think we can say not good.
It's probably not great, yeah.
Yeah.
So she's the centre of things right now, although there are still people willing to support him. So mostly in the Lancastrian heartlands, as they call them, with Wales and the north and Scotland. I mean, there's several places, several castles in England and Wales that hold out for a few years against the Yorkists. There's Alnwick. I can't remember that one on the Welsh borders. There's one in Wales that holds out, I think, until 1468, near enough, before it's finally taken. And there's parts of Northumberland don't fully capitulate. So they stay in some of these places. It's not until 1463, I believe, that she finally returns to France with her son. And even there, she's not quiet. She spends the next few years, again, trying to trump up support for her cause. She's living in exile, though, by this point, in the court of the French king, which is Louis by this time. It's not Charles VII anymore. It's Louis is it the 14th or the 12th? I get my Louis confused.
So, Joanna, Margaret isn't the only interesting woman going on in this household at the moment, is there? She's got a really interesting lady in waiting. Can you tell us about her?
She has indeed. I mean, the picture that's on my front cover, there's Margaret is the one in the black hood, but behind her there's another woman, Catherine Vow. This is one of her ladies in waiting. She's an English woman. She's married to a Lancastrian knight, and she stays with Margaret for pretty much her entire life. She goes to France with her. She's really, really, she's just a devoted friend and lady in waiting. Oh my goodness, they must have been so close. There's not a huge amount on her. She didn't do a great deal, but she just sticks with Margaret through thick and thin. She loses her own husband in the Wars of the Roses, but she still sticks with Margaret through thick and thin.
Maybe because, like, where else would she go if she's lost?
Exactly. It's like, where else would she go? And, you know, tend to think maybe ladies in waiting did form quite close bonds of friendship with them. The women that they served, they probably were best buddies in real life. In real life, this isn't a novel, but you know, they probably were very close friends. I think, her husband had been one of the household knights, or at least very close in Henry's household. So that was obviously how households got to know each other. She would probably have been appointed to Margaret's household at the time of her marriage or shortly afterwards. Probably the only one who did stay with her.
So 1470, there's a final roll of the dice with Henry becoming king once again. How does that go?
Yes. I think, honestly, Margaret I wouldn't say she was unhappy about Henry becoming king again, but she never trusted the Earl of Warwick from the outset. She was probably very wise not to trust the Earl of Warwick from the outset. So he's come to France to make all these negotiations with the King of France because he wants to restore Henry to the throne. She actually refuses to even come until she's got certain promises from him. She won't even appear. She won't even be in the same room as him until she's extracted certain promises from him. She is involved in the negotiations, but in all honesty, the King of France has got more to do with it, and he's also using things for his own purposes. So he'll help the Earl of Warwick give in an army, help him put Henry back on the throne. But the Earl of Warwick has got to do something for him. He's got to attack the Burgundians. Yeah, this support doesn't come free. She's not too happy about it because, of course, her priority is getting her husband back on the throne, restoring the throne, not so much helping dear old cousin Louis again in his battle against the Burgundians. Of course, they do come to an arrangement in the end. His daughter is betrothed to her son, but it's months before she sails to England. Part of it's bad weather, part of it's political fandangling. It's not necessarily because she doesn't want to, it's because she literally doesn't want to return until he's actually been placed back on the throne. It's not going to be, it's a vague possibility. No, she's not coming back until he's actually back there and until certain conditions are met. There's also a thing that King Louis wouldn't allow her to sail until the Earl of Warwick had attacked his Burgundian enemies.
That's probably a safe bet for him, as far as he's concerned, right?
Yes. It's like, you hold up your side of the bargain first.
How much of their marriage does they actually spend together? For
the first few years, quite a long time. So from 1445 to 1460, they are together for most of the time. There's a period in the late 1450s where she's on her own estates. I mean, to be honest with you, in the correspondence that does survive, and there's not a lot of correspondence, they speak quite fondly of each other. There's even something when she's on the run in 1460 that Henry has a special token he will send her when he wants her to come return, so that the Yorkists can't trick her into coming under false pretenses and arrest her or harm her, and things like that. So they've clearly got these personal messages going on. In terms of romance, you don't know, but there's no reason to suggest that they didn't like each other, at least. And yeah, I'm not the one for Edward wasn't Henry's son. I think he probably was. I don't think she would have been stupid enough to pass off someone else's child as Henry's son, to be honest with you. Though, of course, there were the rumours, but rumours are always... But most of them are spread by the Yorkists, so that kind of tells you everything you need to know.
So how is Margaret remembered, and is it justifiable, the impression we have of her?
Well, as they always say, history is written by the winners, and in that case the winners were the Yorkists. So she was remembered for a lot of time as the evil, wicked queen who was trying to put a bastard child on the throne. There were even ridiculous stories in 1460 that she was planning to murder Henry and marry the Earl of Somerset. That these even got on their way to France. So yeah, she's often remembered as the evil queen who was vicious and immoral and everything a queen should not be. Is it justified? Probably not. In exceptional circumstances, she defended herself. Was she vicious? I think she wasn't doing anything worse than the men were doing. She just kind of thought that she should fight in the same way that they were fighting. Fight back in equal terms. Because when all else failed, when the political solution failed, she decided the military solution was the best thing.
Do we know much about her physical Margaret of Anjou? I just remember
her appearance.
She looked quite weedy and small and unassuming in her pictures.
Yeah, I mean, the main one we have is the manuscript that was made for her wedding. I don't actually have that on the front cover of my book because I asked them not to do that one, because that's what every book on Margaret of Anjou has got. That shows her with long, sort of strawberry blonde hair. I wouldn't say she's exceptionally small. She's probably quite petite in frame, but you don't really know massively what she looked like. She might have been blonde. She might have had darker hair, even slightly red. She was said to be pretty, but then most princesses were said to be beautiful when they married the king. So it's kind of a standard trope. I mean, Yolanda of Aragon, her grandmother, was supposed to have been quite a bit of a stunner.
Could you tell us a bit about what kind of sources you found on Margaret of Anjou? Because sources on women aren't always easy to find. Slightly easier when they're monarchs.
Yes.
But tell us a bit about that.
Well, one of my favourite sources, actually, was a book I found on the letters of Margaret of Anjou. Quite a lot of her transcribed letters. I remember the name of the author of the book. It often eludes me. Let me get my copy and look back. Yeah, it's a relatively new book. I think this one only came out in 2020. That one was really useful, sort of to see what Margaret was doing in her own voice, in a sense. The only problem with a lot of them is that some of them are letters to other people and her response doesn't survive, but in other cases there are her letters. Of course, there's the standard medieval chronicles and things, but again, they're very standardised. A lot of the time there's a bit of a trope. And honestly, I think because she was on the losing side, we don't know how much of her correspondence has been lost and destroyed or was revised later on by people who were not very friendly towards her. Again, letters are the best thing with Margaret. If you can get things actually written by your subject, that's a winner. You can't always. Land grants and things like that, charters. But it's very good. I mean, some of them are just mundane things like property grants, lands and tenants, and, oh, can you please help me? Someone stole my sheep. Yes, there's always a letter, can you help me? Someone stole my sheep. Yes. Sheep rustling.
So you've mentioned that she's on the defeated side. Tewkesbury puts the final nail in that. What becomes of her in later life?
So she's basically sold back to France. About 5 years after Tewkesbury, she's actually sold back to France because Edward IV needs money. They say ransom, but yeah, she was sold back to Louis, her cousin, because Edward IV was strapped for cash, as he always was. She goes back to live on a lot of her father's lands because her father, René of Anjou, doesn't die until something like 1480. He lives many years. He lives into his 80s. But sadly, yes, she's got to live off his charity for a long time because she's got nothing left. She dies actually in one of his castles in 1482. This time she's barely into her 50s, about 52 years of age. In England, she spent some time living with some of her friends, including Alice Chaucer, but she's just kind of passed from pillar to post, living at the mercy and charity of other people. It's quite sad, really, the last 10 years of her life. Just before she died, the King of France helped himself to some of her dogs.
Just to rob her face in it.
Yeah.
So oh, yeah, I want them.
I also understand that in the French Revolution that they some revolutionaries scattered her bones. They ransacked the cathedral and scattered her remains.
How rude. Yeah, I know it is rude. To be honest with you, they did that to quite a lot of people. I think John Duke of Bedford's tomb was similarly treated. So it wasn't necessarily anything personal against her. It was just royalty. We don't like royalty.
And of course, she has to live the last decade of her life having lost her son as well, because the one son dies at Tewkesbury.
So she has lost everything by this point. I mean, they say that that's the thing that breaks her in the end. For all these years of having this excellent resolve of never to lay down and roll over, as you said, at that point she just hasn't got anything left. Had she had other children, it would have been different, obviously. And you never know, if her son had been properly married to Anne Neville and had had a child of his own, it might have been different.
Wonderful. So thank you, Joanna. She certainly is a formidable woman. I like the idea of she-wolf being an accolade, so she's my she-wolf.
Yeah, to be fair. Might have taken it as a compliment. Who knows?
I hope she would have. Remind everybody what the book is called.
It is called She-Wolf for France, twice Queen of England.
Brilliant. And that is available as of the middle of April from Amberley, and we will put it in the History Hack bookshop as well. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
That's all right. And I think it was high time for a new Margaret biography, so that's why I wrote that.
Our incredible guests give us 45 minutes of their time to join us and talk about their work or their new book. This is just a small taster. As a result, we have launched our very own bookshop on bookshop.org, where you can find our guests' latest books, you can support them, and you can support us on History Hack. 10% of every sale via our bookshop supports the podcast and allows us to keep going and bring you more top-of-the-line guests. You can find our bookshop at bookshop.org/shop/History Hack, or search for us in the shop section. Thank you so much for your continued support. We really appreciate our listeners and supporters. So make sure you get down to the bookshop and grab yourselves a new book.